today, Professor Dr. Anneliese Goslin. Professor Dr. Anneliese Goslin is Emeritus Professor at the University of Pretoria, South Africa. She obtained a bachelor's in physical education, honors, MA, DPhil, and MBA degrees from University of Pretoria and a higher education diploma from the University of South Africa. Her areas of specialization focus on strategic management in sport, sport leadership, sport governance, and sport curriculum design. In her academic career, she has published widely in accredited scientific journals, contributed chapters in academic books, acted as editor of the textbooks, and acted as study lead and promoter of the master and doctoral students. She has presented scientific presentations on all 5 continents and delivered invited keynote addresses at the ICSSPE WASM TAFISA World Congress. She acted as Congress Director for 2 international congresses in the field of sports science and serves as reviewer for international peer-reviewed journals. At present, she is a co-chair of the Development Committee of ICSSPE and serves as the Executive Board of ICSSPE. She was previously served as chair of the Ministerial Advisory Committee for Recreation for South Africa and vice president of ICSSPE and the TAFISA. Professor Anneliese Goslin developed and is currently the co-lead and one of the presenters of the University of Pretoria, accredited certificate and advanced certificates in sport business management for Malawi National Council of Sport from 2010 till present. In 2020, she contributed as facilitator to the virtual certified sport leadership course presented by African Union Sports Council region. She received several awards during a professional academic career, including the prestigious ICSSPE Philip Noy Baker Research Award, an IOC Award for Contribution to Sport for All, a Pioneer for Sport for All Award from TAFISA, the South African President's Award for her contribution to the promotion of recreation in South Africa, a Sport for All Award from the Austrian government, and the Old Mutual Medal for the best MBA student in the class of 1980. Her current professional focus includes reviewing and developing academic curricula for sport coach education and sport leadership, writing research articles, academic textbooks in the field of physical education and sport management, and acting as consultant in the field of sport and recreation. On behalf of the Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs, Government of India, Khelo India, LNCP, or you could say lectured by National College of Physical Education, a warm welcome to our most dignified speaker, Professor Anneliese Goslin. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
I also welcome Dr. Yuri, President ICSSPE, Professor Rosa, President ICSSPE, I'm learning that, and Dr. Beatrice Freire, Dr. G. Kishore, Dr. Sanjay Prajapati, and all my dear PE teachers to this session. And the session is going to be a wonderful session. Once again, a warm welcome to Professor Anneliese. Over to you, ma'am. Sanjay, you could share the slide, please.
Thank you, Usha. Sanya, can we have the first slide, please?
I'm hearing now.
Oh, there it is. There it is. At the start of the session, and thank you, Usha, for this wonderful introduction. I mean, it's you didn't need to read everything, but thank you for that. But before I start with my topic, that, as you can see, they creating and enabling environments for physical education and community sport coaching, some perspectives and lessons from Africa. Allow me first to thank the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sport, and as well as the Sports Authority of India, and in particular, Usha, for you and Rosa and all your efforts behind the scenes for including me in this series. I really appreciate that. I saw some of the feedbacks and the highlights of the previous round, and it was very impressive. You are indeed global influencers, and I congratulate you on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
The next slide, please.
The next slide, please. Sanjay.
Just before we start, I want to give a little bit of background apart from what Usha just said now. As you know, I come from South Africa, which is a country, you will find me on the southernmost tip of the continent of Africa, as you can see there on the slide. And the place where I reside is that little red circle up there. It's the city called Pretoria, and it's the capital city of our country. Sometimes people ask me, where exactly are you in Africa? And I said, I'm in South Africa. So for some people consider Africa as a country, but there are 54 countries in Africa, and we are just the one that's on the southernmost tip of it. We refer to our nation, our country, sometimes by the name of the Rainbow Nation, because there's a wide spectrum of cultures and ethnic groups in our country. And we often also say we're a world in one country because of the diverse geographical features that we have in our country. When you get to South Africa one day, you will find deserts and oceans and plains and forests, and of course our world-renowned wildlife in our country. So it is indeed a world in one country. And of course, I have to say this, we have cricket in common with India. And now that the summer starts again over here, hopefully we will see some cricket matches again. Usually when the test matches or the ODIs or the T20 matches that we play against India, they are usually highlights on our sporting calendars. And when you look at the school children practicing their cricket skills, they all aspire to be a batter like Sachin Tendulkar or A.B. de Villiers or even Quinton de Kock. And so the next time I watch the cricket matches, I will definitely think of this session that we had today. Next slide, please, Sanjay. Now, I want to give a little bit of context about Africa before I start to go into more detail of exactly what we are experiencing here in our country in terms of physical education and community coaching. As you can see there, Africa is a rather big continent. It's the second biggest continent on the globe. And there's a number of countries that quite easily fit into the African continent. We even see India there on the right-hand side of Africa. Now, the African Union divides Africa into 5 regions for political and agricultural purposes. And our country, we fall in region 5, which is the most southern part. And there's also 10 other countries that are with us in that region. Now, Africa has diverse people, cultures, languages. You can imagine if you go from Cairo at the top down to South Africa at the bottom, that you will find diverse people with diverse cultures and languages. And one can therefore anticipate that the practices in terms of physical education and community sport will differ considerably from north to south and even from east to west. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to physical education and community sport. And over the years, we have learned in Africa that what works elsewhere is not always applicable to Africa or is not even working in Africa. So keep that in mind when we go through the presentation so that you understand Africa is really a unique part of the world with unique needs and unique people. Next slide, please. The aim of my discussion today is to provide a snapshot or paint a picture of the state and status of physical education in Africa, and then specifically in South Africa, and then share some baseline practices or enablers that we might be able to use to unlock and promote the potential of physical education and community sport. And I therefore want to structure my presentation in two parts. The first part, I'll focus on the state and status of physical education and community sport coaching in Africa, and then specifically in South Africa. And then the second part, I want to take that state and status and see if we can deduce some lessons that we can learn from the African perspective and how we can use that to create enabling environments for physical education in South Africa, and then also maybe for some parts of Africa. So the next slide, Sanjay, will take us to the state and status of physical education in Africa. Now, as I said, it differs vastly across the continent. But when we look at the history of physical education and community sport, we see that it has always been there. There was never a period of time in Africa where there was no physical activity or sport, indigenous sport. It was always there. Now, I want to focus on the sub-Saharan part of Africa, that green part. Now, when you look at Africa, at the continent, you will see that the Sahara Desert divides Africa from east to west. And the northern part of Africa is closer to Europe and the Middle East. The way in which they do things are closer to Europe and the Middle East. But the sub-Saharan Africa, the green part, that's a totally different world. And when we look at the history and the presence of physical education, we can distinguish those four periods. The Indigenous Period, the Colonial Period, sorry, the post-independence period, and then the 21st century. Now I'm going to look at the state and status of physical education in those four periods so that we have a clear view of what exactly we have to deal with today. Next slide, please, Sanjay. When we look at the first period, it's called the Indigenous Period. Now, physical education, when you look at huge parts of Africa, it is essential and embedded in the society. It's part of the lives of the people in Africa. And people walked and swam and ran and danced, and they were involved in many types of physical activity. It was indispensable for their daily existence. They led a physical existence. There was no need for extra physical education classes or physical activity sessions, as their daily survival depended on that. We can truly say that Africa lives physical activity. And and when the missionaries then arrived from Europe in Africa, they tried to change the indigenous cultural practices of Africa because they perceived it as being uncivilized. You have to remember that the missionaries came to Africa to educate people for the purpose of transmitting Christianity. But however, while they were trying to educate, so-called educate the people, they stripped the African people from their social and physical culture. Now, in their daily existence, physical activity was seamlessly embedded in society. And it didn't take place in little silos. Now we have this and that, then the next, and then the next thing. It was all embedded seamlessly in their daily lives, and it also formed part of their rites of passage from boyhood to manhood, or from girls to women. And when you look at the pictures on that slide, on the right-hand side, it is the so-called snake dance of the Bavenda people. Now, that is part of the culture, the physical culture of that particular tribe. And it's also a passover from girlhood to womanhood. And when you look at the left-hand side, those are Maasai warriors. The Maasai comes from Kenya. Now, I want to show you that little video just to appreciate the level of physical activity and the level of what is the right word, how they can jump. And if you compare that to the modern high jumper, then you can see that there are some similarities, but they are actually busy doing their cultural dances. They are trying to impress the women or the young girls to find a new bride, and obviously then the warrior that can jump the highest, that man has the best possibility of finding a bride. Can we have the video just quickly, Sanjay? It's not a long video. It's just about 20 seconds, I think. Now, thank you, Sanjay. If you want to see explosive strength, then you have to look at those Maasai warriors. That was part of their daily lives. I've lost the screen now, Sanjay. Can we have the next slide, please, Sanjay?
Anneliese, we're getting it to you.
I lost the screen.
No, the screen, you'll bring it back to you.
Yeah.
Okay, if we can have the next slide, please. Thank you, Sanjay. The next period I want to refer to briefly is the Colonial Period. Now, that period was characterized by contact with the Western world, which marked the beginning of the erosion of physical education, the traditional physical education and activities of Africa. And the missionary models were now established, and that was regarded as the way to go because they perceived the traditional African physical activities as primitive, immoral, anti-Christian. So they brought new models with them, and it was now structured into a physical education curricula that were actually the same as in Europe. The countries of Britain and France and Germany, Portugal, they all had colonies in Africa. And they brought their physical education curricula with them because now we're going to civilize Africa. And then it ended up, as you can see in those pictures, in military drills in neat little rows, and formalized sport that were done in Europe and not in Africa. But the good thing that they did was that they started training teachers how to present this new type of physical activity. When you look at those curricula in the colonial period, what you see that the striking common element in all of those curricula was that the activities had very little or no relevance to the indigenous physical culture of Africa. It was totally westernized and mainly from Europe. So there was no indigenous knowledge or indigenous activities in those curricula for physical education. The next slide, please, Sanjay. Now, the independence period was the period of uhuru. Now, uhuru means freedom in Swahili, and that was the time in the 1960s in the previous century when most sub-Saharan African countries got their political independence from their colonial rulers in Europe. And what it meant for physical education and sport is that they tried to restore some of the indigenous dignities and values that the Africans valued. And they also redefined their education approaches and systems to make it more African and less colonial or less European. Sport was also introduced or kept or retained because now African countries used sport and their talent and their achievements in sport to show the rest of the world their sporting ability and the sporting power they had. And although African countries in the independence period were now responsible for their own education systems and their own physical education curricula, they suffered serious setbacks from socioeconomic conditions. And sadly, in this period, Africa still did not develop their own model for physical education. And to a great extent, they kept on copying the Western models. Now, on the slide, you see there some references that if and when you have time, you can go and read about the development of physical education and community sport in Africa. Professor Amusa and Toriola, they were really pioneers in terms of physical education in Africa, but there are also new and younger researchers that look at how the physical education developed and if it is possible to have a truly African model of physical education. Next slide, please. That brings us to the 21st century, where we are now. And what happened in the rest of the world in terms of physical education was also mirrored in Africa in terms of physical education. As in the rest of the world, physical education in Africa suffered financial constraints, lack of government commitment or sustained government commitment, insufficient numbers of trained physical education teachers, the lack of appropriate facilities and equipment, that's always there in the forefront, and insufficient time allocations in the school timetable. Everything that happened in the rest of the world was actually mirrored in the physical education state and status in Africa. And in general, physical education as a school subject has a very low status in developing African countries. And that has been like that for a number of years. There is a very interesting and insightful reports that Ken Hartman and associates did to look at the global state and status of physical education. And they did reports in 2000, 2009, and 2013. If you want to read and see if there was any development or any progress, those reports are very helpful in this regard. And the interesting finding that runs through from the 2000 report up to the 2013 report was that the same things persisted over a period of at least 13 years. The same problems persisted. And I will talk a little bit later about that as well. We will come to that again. But those are very insightful reports, and it is a global report. So it's not only about Africa, it's about the whole world. And then you can see how your specific country is also rated in those reports. The next slide, please, Sanjay. We do find some drivers of change in physical education in Africa. Now, several organizations or role players like ICSSPE, UNESCO, the IOC, the African Union, and the MINEPS through their Kazan Action Plan, they made substantial contributions to try and improve the status of physical education, at least in policy documents. Now, the African Union is a body similar to the European Union, and that's the continental body for Africa to promote the unity and solidarity of all 54 states, African states. And they also, in their visionary document or their strategic plan called Agenda 2063, they recognize the value and the need for physical education in their vision to become the Africa we want. They see sport specifically and physical education as significant contributors to the Africa they want. Now, there is a reference there, a website, you can read about that if you are interested. UNESCO is also one of the agencies of the world global bodies that actually provide guidelines for policymakers in physical education. And in 2018, they had a pilot program on quality physical education, and South Africa formed part of one of 5 countries in the world that contributed or were involved in that specific pilot project. There again is a website address that you can read the full report from. UNESCO is also responsible for the MINEPS meetings. The MINEPS meetings are to an international platform for sport ministers and senior officials responsible for sport and physical education in their respective countries. And one of the important documents that flowed or resulted from MINEPS 6 in Kazan in 2017 was the so-called Kazan Action Plan. And the Kazan Action Plan aimed to foster involvement and coordination between policymakers in the fields of physical education and physical activity and also sport on all 5 continents. They tried to get some sort of standardized plan that people can, or countries can, follow the guidelines to implement sport and physical education. And that they also tried then to align with the UNESCO or the United Nations 2030 agenda. The Kazan Action Plan is very interesting reading, and there is the website that you can find some more detail on that. Now, in Africa, the country of Madagascar. Now, Madagascar is an island to the east of Africa, and they, in partnership with UNESCO and the African Union, as well as with ICSSPE, they took the lead in implementing the Kazan Action Plan in Africa. And they, in 2018, they organized a regional conference for all experts in physical education and sport in Africa to discuss the need, the value, the challenges, the successes of physical education as well as sport, community sport. And what resulted from that meeting was the so-called Madagascar Declaration that both the Francophone countries, African countries, as well as the Anglophone African countries signed. And that's the guiding document that they will use in their efforts to implement the Kazan Action Plan in the continent of Africa. Next slide, please. There are certainly some encouraging developments in Africa in terms of physical education. It's not all gloom and doom. And despite the results of Ken Hardman's 3 global surveys on the state and status of physical education, which reiterated the marginalization of physical education school curricula in Africa, and also the persistent gap between hope and happening. And that's one of the most significant challenges that Africa faces, is that gap between hope and happening, or between the ideal situation in policy documents and the reality on grassroots level. But there are encouraging examples as well. When we look at the countries of Kenya, Zambia, Uganda, and even South Africa, we all acknowledge physical education as a compulsory examination school subject, albeit then with considerable constraints. That picture that you see there is a very real representation of the situation in South African schools. The average situation. There are very little dedicated facilities, and there are very little equipment, but nevertheless, the teachers try their best to implement physical education. Next slide, please. When we look at the state and status of physical education broadly in Africa, we find that the policy documents in South Africa, they are embedded and connected in different policy documents. When we start at the red one, the outer one, the African Union Sports Council Region 4 Strategic Plan, that one provides input to South Africa's National Development Plan, which in turn then also take into considerations the guidelines in the South African Charter of Basic Education Rights. And that brings us to the blue one with the policy documents in terms of sport and recreation and physical education in the different African government and South African government departments. In South Africa, we have 12 million school learners, more or less, in the public school system. We also have a private school system, but that is additional to the 12 million learners. And we have around about 25,500 public schools in South Africa. So it's a huge scope that the teachers have to try and get physical education and community sport to the whole public school system. Next slide, please. When we look at the policy documents guiding physical education in South Africa, we find that one good thing is that physical education is a compulsory school subject in South African schools from grade R up to grade 12, which means about 13 years of exposure to physical education. Now, the legal and executive responsibility for the provision of physical education to the public schools, that rests with the Government Department of Basic Education. Basic Education deals with grade R, that's the preschool year, up to grade 12 or the matric year. But on paper, it's a compulsory school subject. And its legal status is also protected by the South African Education Act. But over the years, what we found was that physical education decreased or was degraded from a full standalone subject in the school curriculum or the school timetable to a position where it currently constitutes about between 25 and 50% of a broader learning areas. The life skills learning area, physical education shares the time there with 3 other learning areas. And in the secondary school, in the life orientation, it shares 50% of the time with entrepreneurship. So it's not a full-time standalone subject anymore, but it was degraded to a part of something else. When you look at that table over there, you will see the time allocation for physical education in the national curricula. And there are also national curricula for both the primary schools as well as the secondary schools. Now, in the foundation phase, it forms part of life skills, and it has 2 hours a week up to the further education and training phase. Those are the 2 last years of secondary school. And then you only have 1 hour of allocated to physical education because it forms part of a broader learning area. So that what you see there on the slide is all on paper. That's the policy, and those are the guiding documents. But when we get to, and you can go to the next slide, Sanjay, please. When we actually get to the practice of how this national curricula and time allocation are implemented, we find that we are back at the curse of the gap between hope and happening. It's all very nice on paper. It's protected by the Education Act. There are policies. There are political commitment. But the gap between the practice and the theory, that is a consistent gap that remains there from 2000, when Ken Hartman did his first, actually he started in 1999 with his first global report on physical education, and that gap is persisting until today. Now, in 2019, UNESCO commissioned Professor Cora Burnett of the University of Johannesburg to again determine the state and status of physical education in South Africa, to see if there was any progress from what Ken Hartman found in his report in 2013 up to 2019. Yeah, we are at the, yeah, there is the, if you are interested in the full report, there is the website that you can download it from. Next slide, please. Now, I'm just going to focus on selected findings of this report because the thing is way too long and we have a time limit in any case in here. When we look at the South African school system, we find that schools are divided into 5 quintiles according to their surrounding socioeconomic environment. Now, in South Africa, the Gini coefficient is 0.66. That is one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world. And what it actually means is that the income is so skewed between the rich and the poor that 20% of the people in South Africa, they control 66% of the income. And you can imagine then what the income gap is, or the income inequality in South Africa. And when you look at the pictures over there, you will find that we have private schools that have state-of-the-art sport facilities, as you can see there, the picture with the tennis courts. And then at the same time, 10 kilometers further, you have township schools that have no facilities, no tennis courts, but they still are interested in tennis. And as you can see from that picture, they make do with what they have. On the right-hand side, you also see the inequality in terms of classrooms. The bottom picture over there is a general idea of the situation in township or rural classrooms. Overcrowded, not very much equipment, and the top picture is there, shows you the ideal situation. So we have huge differences in the same country and not very far apart that you have to deal with because of the income inequality in our country. Next slide. One of the issues that also came out of the report in 2019 was that physical education in schools are perceived differently. Despite the policy documents, despite the curricula, teachers and principals, they interpret the role of physical education differently. We find that there are 5 or 6 of those approaches on the slide. Some see physical education in service of sport development. So it's a sport approach. They teach sport, they coach sport. Other principals see it as physical activities that can contribute to general health and fitness. So it goes to the health approach, or the social change approach, where we use physical activity and physical education to address all the social ills in our society. And then also you have the physical literacy approach, where, and I know Margaret Whitehead spoke about the physical literacy approach. And then you have the free play approach, where the teacher just gives the class a ball and say, play until the end of the lesson. So it is interpreted differently, and obviously then we know from research findings that the way in which physical education is viewed by learners and principals, that determines the way in which it is taught, and that eventually influences the perception of learners about the value of physical education. Next slide, please. Well, I think you are all familiar with this one. Obviously, there is a shortage of properly and appropriately trained physical education teachers. And what we found in 2019 is that in primary schools, physical education is taught mainly by class educators. And class educators do not have any training or qualification in physical education. They are responsible for teaching math or language or science, but they are also then assigned physical education classes. The specialist physical education teachers, they are only 13%. Now that immediately raises a huge challenge because, again, if you are not appropriately qualified to teach a subject, that will impact the quality of the teaching. And then we have an interesting thing that the external service providers, the so-called community coaches, they are brought in from outside to provide physical activity. But obviously, because they are mostly community coaches, they focus on the sport that they are interested in. We do see that physical education in terms, can we have the next slide, please? Now, when we looked at the attitudes towards physical education as a school subject, we find that in the lower socioeconomic areas, the status of physical education is low because parents and headmasters, they emphasize the importance of subjects like maths, science, and languages. And we found that in many cases, physical education is only taught once or twice a year. And because it is an examinable subject, there must be a mark or a grade on the report card. So they go only out once or twice a year so that the teacher can find a mark that they can put into the report card. There's a general perception that physical education in public schools does not provide any value. When you speak to teachers, they say to you that physical education in schools will not improve the future career path of my child. They simply see it as a waste of money. You have pockets of schools on primary school where physical education is taught according to the curriculum. But overall, it has a very low status. And in secondary school, the teachers and the principals, they just see it as a waste of time and as boring. And when we spoke to learners, they also expressed that physical education is a boring subject. It will not help me in any way in my future career path. So that is an alarming finding, because if we are interested in learners choosing physical education as a career path, that finding is going to impact negatively on their ultimate career choice. The next slide, please, Sanjay. Okay, now what is the future of physical education in South African public schools? Now, at the moment, you know, we are in a very unusual time. And in terms of the short-term future of physical education, at the moment, there is no physical education or school sport in any of the public schools due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The learners are back at school, but there are no physical education or school sport. In terms of the long-term future of physical education, there's also concerns. Now, remember that physical education is a compulsory school subject, but from 2023, physical education will be removed from the school system, and it will be replaced by history as a compulsory school subject. Now, you might find that very weird, but in terms of nation building, and you have to remember that our country comes from a divided past, and each section of the society have their own interpretation of the history. Now, in order to unite the nation, physical education will be dropped, and we will have history as a compulsory school subject from grade R up to grade 12. That moves physical education out of the formal school system, and it actually becomes now school sport, which in any case continues. But now, in the long term, school sport will continue because they see, or our country sees, school sport or elite sport as a pathway, or school sport as a pathway to elite sport. Our sporting achievements or performances that are also seen as a way to build national pride. And in some of the higher socioeconomic areas where the schools are situated, they also see sport as a way to build the image and the reputation, and that attracts potential sponsors then, so that to the school, so that they can improve their sport facilities and sport equipment. And that then, there's a clear shift towards community sport and community sport coaches then, and the significance of those people contributing to the sporting future of South Africa. And we have the next slide, please. Oh dear, I don't see a slide, Sanjay. Okay, I'm looking for slide 20, please. Thank you. Community sport is very important in Africa and in South Africa. Africa is a continent of youth. Half of the population of 1.2 billion is under the age of 25 years. And there are predictions that soon the continent will have more than 2 billion people. That is 1/3 of the global population. And this young generation needs peace. They need access to education and career prospects. So the sport is seen in almost all the government documents and policies as an effective means to promote that education. Good governance and all of the wonderful things that we want to get from sport. And there are examples, and you can download those things, where community sport projects in Africa focus on different things, like in Ethiopia, vocational education. In Mozambique, it's all about strengthening municipalities or promoting democracy through sport. In Kenya, community sport is used to spread peace and hope. So the importance, the significance of community sport is definitely increasing on the continent of Africa. What the common denominator between all of those projects is that it is not about winning medals or physical education. It is merely community development. So sport becomes an instrument in community development. Next slide, please. When we look at the notion of community sport in Africa, I want to refer you to that pyramid that we call the sport development pyramid. And way back in 29, Darlene and I developed the notion of sport development pyramid, where we said, okay, there are certain horizontal dimensions. From the blue one, that's the basic movement development, or as you could always also say, physical literacy, up to the red pinnacle, where it is about international and elite sport. But there are also vertical dimensions that need to be developed from bottom to top. And when you look at the left side, then you will find that the bottom two layers of the sport development pyramid, that those activities are aimed at sport for participation and pleasure, the so-called community sport. Now, community sport is known by different names in Africa. Sometimes it's called sport for all, or sport for development, or sport or development through sport. It has different names, but basically it focuses on community sport where that is accessible for everyone, where there is opportunity and participation and access for all, rather than the top layers that are focused on podium and performance sport. So the community coaches, sport coaches in Africa, becomes a very important layer of service provider on the grassroots level. Next slide, please. When we look at the policy documents in South Africa in terms of community sport, sport is described as contributing to a winning nation and an active nation. And they also refer to the contribution of physical education there to a winning nation and an active nation. And our white paper on sport and recreation, you can see there, and if you're interested, you can download it from that web address. What we do find in South Africa is that we have numerous sport facilities. We have some of the best state-of-art facilities in the world, as you can see from that picture on the right. But at the same time, we also have next to nothing facilities, because the challenge we have in South Africa is that those state-of-the-art facilities and developed facilities, they are not spread evenly throughout the country. They are mostly in urban areas. So once you get out of the urban areas into the rural areas, then you have little to no facilities. And that's where the community sport coaches become valuable assets, because they can actually present activities with very little facilities. Their whole perception about getting sport to community is totally different from the elite sport. So they actually take the sport and the opportunities and the access to community sport to the people where they are, and not the other way around, where in terms of elite sport coaching, where the athletes have to come to the coach. They are really spreading and disseminating community sports throughout the country in South Africa. Next slide, please. The power of sport in our country, in the policy documents, is used to reach and attract individuals from different socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds and unite them in an anti-discriminatory environment. And that community sport is really a way in which we can, coming from our divided political past, it's really a way that we can get people together and learn from each other. You will find several service deliverers in the field of community sport in Africa. I'm quite sure you are familiar with the Sport for Development organization, also the SCORE organization. Those are organizations that recruit volunteers from all over the world to come and serve as community coaches in the country. And then one that is situated in South Africa is the Sport for Social Network, or the CCN network. And that's an important network with very good resources in terms of, and toolkits in terms of community sports. So if you are interested in toolkits and really practical aids to implement community sport, Go to that website and download. There's lots of resources that you can download from there. Next slide, please. The Social Change, Sport for Social Change network in South Africa is one of the significant ones that really impact in terms of community sport. And they base their approach on the Kazan Action Plan, the National South African Sport and Recreation Plan, as well as the African Union Agenda 2063. And they do all of that to contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that you can see in that slide. That is the body of the house. Now, the Sport for Social Change network is not limited to South Africa, but the footprint is in more than 13 African countries. And they really do very good work. And there are, as I said, a number of very useful tools for community sport that you can download from that specific web address. Next slide, please. Now, you will remember at the beginning of the presentation, I said in the colonial period of physical education and sport, the activities were all brought in from Europe, and the indigenous cultural sport and games activities were ignored. What we find now is that the indigenous games and sport in South Africa, that's been brought back, but not in the public schools, but as an activity after school. And the government department identified 7 indigenous sports that represent the different cultures in our country. And they are promoting those indigenous sports through community sport leaders to contribute to preserving the cultural heritage. The names over there, the top left one is the stick fighting one, and I think you will recognize the listeners from India, you will recognize Koko, the game top right. But those are the things that are done outside the school and not inside the school curricula. But it does contribute to preserving our cultural heritage, and there are annual Indigenous games and sport festivals in South Africa where people come from all parts of the country, and then a national team is selected that also attend the Tafisa World Sport for All Games on a regular basis. So there are really indications that there are efforts to get back to the African roots, our cultural, our physical culture roots in community sport. Next one, please. Well, if we can summarize all the previous slides, I can say that in general, the state and status of physical education, especially physical education, is not ideal. Community sport is much better, but it's not ideal. And we come back every time to the gap between policy and practice, or hope and happening. And the million-dollar question is, how can we close that gap? And the person who can figure that out will definitely be the savior of physical education. When we look at the situation in Africa in terms of physical education and community sport, we learned that there are certain factors or enablers that must be in place. And once those are in place, it might increase the chances, but it does not guarantee that it will close the gap and create those enabling environments. But at least we have to be aware of those that we need to focus on. Next slide, please. Now, when you look at that slide, you will see what we have learned from Africa, the African realities. We have identified 8 enablers for physical education and community sport. Now, the ones that are in the green circles, those are the ones that I want to briefly discuss. When you look at the others that are a little in the background, it seems to be those ones that are on paper, but we are more interested in the green ones because those are the ones that we have to practically implement. We can't just talk about it and hope for the best. They have to be implemented. And those are the sustainable career paths, the networks and partnerships, the community ownership and parental support, and then obviously the trained sport leaders and physical education teachers. Can we have the next slide, please? When we look at the first enabler, that's the one that I think is the most important. If we can succeed, if physical education or educators or researchers all over the world can succeed in putting this enabler in place, we have our chances for the survival of physical education increases. There must be a clear, sustainable career path for physical education and sport coaches. In many parts of the world, as well as in many African countries, physical education as a career does not have a good track record. We need a career path, a sustainable career path that will pull prospective teachers towards this career. And at the moment, we don't see that. And if there are no opportunities for physical education teachers for promotion and career progress, students will not consider it as a potential career course. It's very, very simple. If there is not a demand, then also higher educational institutions or colleges, they are not interested to offer qualifications in that field. And it becomes then a vicious circle of demand and supply. And then you end up with a policy document that says it's a compulsory subject, but once you get out on the field, it's taught by someone with no qualifications whatsoever in terms of physical education. And at the moment, unfortunately, physical education as a career is not perceived as a way out of poverty. It's simply not. That's why students migrate towards subjects like science and maths and accounting and technology, because that provides a clear career path out of poverty. And you have to remember that most of Africa is struggling with huge poverty challenges. Next slide, please. One of the things that we also learned is community ownership. I'm quite sure you've heard that parents say, I don't want my children to take part in physical education. It's a waste of time. There's no future in physical education. But one lesson that we learned is that the value of physical education and community sport must be owned and accepted by a community, by the parents, not by the physical education teachers, but by the parents and the community leaders. It must be a bottom-up approach. Once we have that, our chances increases. And we also in Africa deal with cultural values and norms that prevent segments of the society from access and opportunities to physical education and community sport. It's a cultural thing. It's a cultural value that girls, for example, don't do this, or once you went through your rites of passage, then you don't you are not involved in those things anymore. So we see that many parents in sub-Saharan Africa prefer academic subjects over physical education and sport. And it's in essence, it's a case of idealism of physical educators that are now in the profession, people like us, versus the realism of the situation on grassroots, where you have to find a sustainable career. And in Africa, you also deal with the interesting thing, it's called black tax. And it has nothing to do with the tax that you pay to the government. It has to do with raising a child is the responsibility of a community. So everyone contributes. And if you then send people to higher education, they have to obtain a qualification. And once they have a career, they have to support the people that supported them to get into a higher education or get a qualification. And obviously, physical education is not a sustainable career path at the moment. So we are in a bit of a catch-22 situation over here. Next slide, please. Networks are also very important. In Africa, is all about a group culture. You cannot survive on yourself, by yourself. You need networks and partnerships. And there is an African proverb, as you can see there, that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So that's when you need your partnerships, your support from the community leaders, your support from parents. So involve as many groups or decision makers to support and build your case for physical education in schools and in community sport. You cannot come with a global declaration and bring it to the community and say, this is how you have to do it. It simply doesn't work. Next slide, please. That is the famous one about trained sport leaders. It's not always possible to get to an institution for full-time learning or training. It's the socioeconomic conditions prevent that. But the community sport coaches, they are very innovative, and they find ways of getting trained or getting the information. The national sports councils in Africa, they are also supporting the notion of trained coaches, because we work with sport, and sport can be a little bit of a risk at sometimes, and we work with young people. So we need the correct training. And many of the national sports councils in Africa, they partner with universities to design accredited distance education courses. Those courses, are not, doesn't lead to a formal qualification, but it does lead to an accredited certificate, university accredited certificate that provide evidence that you are qualified in some areas, and specifically in terms of community sport. The example of Malawi's National Sports Council, they partnered with the University of Pretoria, and we developed a certificate, an advanced certificate course in sport leadership for them. And the university has been presenting that for 10, 11 years already. And they receive an accredited university certificate. So if there are any one of you who are interested in the university helping you to design such a course, you're welcome to contact me on my email over there. Next slide, please. Right, that brings us to the conclusion. Everyone listening to this webinar on this afternoon, We know what the potential value of physical education is. We know that. We are in the field. But we don't have to convince each other. We have to convince people outside the field about the value of physical education. So we have to target our advocacy towards other groups. And one of the most important target groups is the parents. Now, parents make decisions for their children. And if they are not convinced about the value and the cultural appropriateness of physical education or sport, we can advocate until we're blue in the face. What we also need to remember is that when you look at the challenges facing physical education for the past 70 years, it's the same challenge. Nothing gets solved. We talk about the same things. We keep on asking the same questions. We keep on addressing the same challenges. And if you don't believe me, go read back in history about what were the issues. It's the very same issues in physical education that we are faced in Africa today. I remember, and the reason why I chose 70 years is simply because I'm not 70, but I'm going towards 70. And from my experience at school, in primary and secondary school, it's the very same challenges that we are facing now. So that tells me that we are doing something wrong. We must do something differently to move on. Otherwise, the next generation in 50 more years will face the same things and we never get forward. We address the same issues. Physical education has to be packaged differently. The current format is not attractive to school learners in Africa. It might be attractive to people or learners in other parts of the world, but I'm focusing specifically on Africa. And if we really look at it differently, and if we find that we must take it out of schools, we must be brave enough to do that. Because if we don't do that, we will damage the reputation and the image of physical education that are working in other parts of the world. So if it's not appropriate for Africa now, take it out and be brave. Focus on community sport. And the question that I want to leave you there with is, will physical education become a dinosaur? Or maybe is it a dinosaur already that no one is interested and that has no value in modern society? I thank you for listening. And if we can go to the last slide, Sanjay, please. As you know, I'm also on the executive board of ICSSPE, and those of you, it's an organizational membership, but somewhere in the future, the young ones that are listening, if you are interested in the work of ICSSPE, there are contact details there of the executive director, Detlef Dumont, and there is the email address. Feel free to contact him and see if we can fight this fight for physical education into the next generation. I thank you for listening.
Sanjay, did you ask her? Sanjay? Will you ask? Dr. Anneliese, it was a wonderful presentation. I'll just take up one or two questions. Hope you can hear me. Anneliese?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So one of the question put forth is in South Africa, is there different policy in private schools and government schools?
Yes, there are. Government schools are subsidized by government, obviously. Some schools pay school fees and some don't. It all depends in which quintile you are, the school is. If you're in a lower socioeconomic quintile, you don't pay school fees. But the curriculum for all public schools are prescribed by the Department of Basic Education. Private schools are not subject to jurisdiction of government, and they have their own curricula. And you find that in some of the private schools, they have elements of physical education, and some don't. Some just focus on after school sport, or if there is a lesson period labeled physical education, it would be more focused on sport, the teaching and coaching sport.
Yeah, thank you. There's another question by Jagannatha Rao. Most of the athletes from Africa, they're outstanding in distance running. Could you just tell me why is it so?
You know, I'm not a sports scientist, but I'm in sport management, but I'll try my best to answer it. When you look at the context of Africa, first of all, you have to remember that it is a physical existence. Everything happens physically. Children run to school for 10, 12 kilometers a day, go to school and go and run back. So their whole existence are physical. So their physical fitness and physical condition are in general better than children in other continents that do not lead a physical life. The runners from Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, there has been lots of research on that. Why is it that they are so good? Because it's mainly the runners from Kenya. Now, when you remember the slide I had about the Maasai warriors, the Maasai is a tribe from Kenya, and you could see their physical build. They are tall people. Kenya and Uganda, what is the word? The elevation above sea level is higher. Those are from some of the higher parts of Africa. So they live on levels high above sea level. So those of you who are sports scientists, you know what the effect of training on high altitudes are. So those are some of the speculations that are given, or reasons that are given. But there are research that look at different things. And as I said, I'm not a sports scientist. But if you are interested, go search for why are the runners from Africa so good. But it is a part of it is definitely the physical existence that they live, for their survival.
Thank you. There's yet another question by Wajid Bashir. Could you kindly explain the bottom-top approach, which you had mentioned, you and Kluka, I think you could just explain onto that part.
The bottom top, I mentioned the bottom top approach when I said that you need the buy-in or the ownership from the community. The community must understand and accept the value of physical education for their children, and it's mainly the parents. The parents must understand why it is important, or why we think it's important for their children to have physical education. Now, once they understand that, they put pressure on schools or community leaders to make sure that those policies and time allocations and curricula that are on paper, that it is implemented. If they are not convinced, if parents are not convinced about the value of physical education, then all of these wonderful policies that come from the top-down approach will not work. We see it in Africa. There are so many declarations, so many policies, so many plans about how to implement physical education. in Africa, but still it doesn't happen. It always comes back to that the parents say, our culture doesn't support that. I don't see a future career. So the bottom approach is the parents and the community leaders must push up from the bottom so that physical education gets its rightful place in schools.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Yuri, please. You need to unmute Dr. Yuri. Unmute, please.
I would recommend that Darlene will comment first since she.
Okay, Darlene, I'm sorry. Darlene, you need to unmute, Darlene. Or unmute, please. Unmute. Unmute.
Sorry. I'm so delighted to be with you today for many reasons. The presentation in my mind was really quite a complete one to give the rest of the world the understanding of what goes on in the continent, but more specifically in the continent of sub-Saharan Africa. And I've been reading the webinar chats, and it's very interesting to see that there can be perhaps some commonalities between what is being done and used for ways to get Africa to adopt the community, as well as within India. And so I think there could be some real linkages to see what works here and what works there, regardless of religion or regardless of culture. There may be, because of physical environments, there may be some things that would be helpful to learn about and to see what happens. I appreciate all that Anneliese has put together, because she has what I call a scholarly approach to a topic, and gives us good information that's based on facts and her research. So I thank her for that. And I am really delighted that there's been over 2,000 watching and listening to this, because this is an area of the world that is terribly important for the future of the world. And so anything that we can do to not only present this as some issues, but it also gets us in other parts of the world to check to see what are we doing that is approaching correctness, if you will, for the rest of the world. So Anneliese, I thank you very much. Rosa, I think it's been a wonderful thing that you could get her to contribute today. And I hope it looks like from the chats again that people are really interested in perhaps the linkages or the connections between especially sub-Saharan Africa and India. So thanks.
You're on mute.
Thanks, darling. Professor Rosa, please.
Thank you very much, Anneliese, for wonderful explanation and for showing us the picture of Africa and South Africa in particular, which is, again, the reality of many places in the world, okay, that has a similar history of an indigenous background and then a colonial period. So it's very similar in that sense. And I still remember the words of Professor Amusa, indicating that one of the biggest problems is how we imitate what we believe the others are doing better because they are the top level countries, and we don't develop our own in our countries. Now, the other element, which is really important, it's to analyze and to keep in mind that there has been a strong effort, as you indicated, for top organizations, and let's say UNESCO. Nevertheless, when we get that physical education might not be in there, or is not a compulsory subject in there, it's an indicator that the messages they are giving are not reaching either. So the policies in there, but maybe our research should focus on what is going on in the grassroots level and what is happening. Because really the fact that few physical education teachers, it's an element, and social acceptance is so important. And if we still haven't delivered the message, and I said society, the value of physical education, so of course several stakeholders have to be in place. I do believe we have to tell UNESCO it's not working, because normally we are sometimes soft to speak to this top organization of what's going on. My other message would be comparative studies. And as we said in the women's research, show good models. We need to show good models of physical education that exists in the world, physical education syllabus. For example, Cuba has a very good model and has very good results, but who knows about that? So we don't project that either. So that's another story that we have to find out how we make it, that there are indeed good examples, good practices, as it is called. Okay, so, and of course if we connect that with the fact that the UNESCO SDG are telling us to inclusive physical education to all, then we have to push that physical education has to be there. Now, the other elements, and when you indicate parents, I want to highlight how important it is. And I saw that beautiful video from the Singh family in India, which is a very good example. So how we can show those sort of models so people can get more connected. So perhaps a way would be to get the media more connected with us, to work in PE, to push for that. And the other thing will be comparative studies and show. So maybe, some tiny countries and people that don't know much that are doing good physical education and are providing a good system to all the public system, because that's the other important element, the public education, that everybody have access, that parents don't have to pay the physical education teacher to have their kids doing that in class. So those are two ideas. And thank you so much. I really appreciate all what you have said and all the good examples you provided for our physical education, and all participants. All the links are excellent. Thank you, Anneliese.
You're welcome. Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you, Professor Rosa. Dr. Yuri, please.
Well, what can I say? We heard a wonderful presentation on how physical education and sport is in Africa, from probably, if not the #1 speaker, then the #2 speaker about this topic. And thank you so much, Anneliese. For me, it was a learning lecture, and I learned a lot. And you reached my knowledge to a great extent. My comment on my thoughts about your presentation are the following one. First, if in 2023 physical education will be removed out of the physical education curriculum, namely in the school system in Africa, in South Africa, it means not that the product is bad, but that we failed to market it properly. In other words, I think that this is also an issue not just for Africa and South Africa, but for the entire world. We physical education people, coaches, we are expert in our specific discipline. we need to reach out to experts in marketing, in delivering, in order to convince politicians about the importance of physical education through the life path of a person, of an individual. And for me, to take out physical education from the school system is as if you expect a tree to grow without is the roots for all kind of physical activities. And if it's not done rightly, properly, systematically throughout the school system, next to all the other professions that are being taught, then we have very limited chances to have more people to adopt physical activity through their life path. And this is of high concern to all those who love and believe in physical education and sport. So I think this probably is hits me, and it's a message that I'm taking from you, and maybe we can discuss it in one of our executive meeting at ICSSPE and see so nicely what you came up with. Hope versus how did you call it? Happening. Right. Documents versus practical activities. And this has to be delivered as quickly as possible to the highest officials within UNESCO, United Nations, and wherever we can hit the hammer and hit on the rock, the sooner the better. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Yuri.
Thank you.
Beatrice, for your remarks, please.
Anneliese, thank you very much. I enjoyed very much your presentation.
Thank you.
Especially because we are both from colonized countries. And then, like Rosa said, we are, have very similar situation. That the European ideas that came into the country, went to the countries, and the dysfunction all of the local people, and then all the traditional games, they were not allowed anymore, and many of them are not there anymore. But I can see that some of the groups that you told us, that they are revival the games. That's something very important. And probably, as everybody said, probably should write something together, or a book, or more something that goes for local people, right? Like some videos that Yuri showed, yesterday. Something very simple that start getting the mind of people, that help them to change the behavior and give more values to the physical education. And in Brazil, we have the same thing. Like they put much more attention on math, on language, and then we have only now, on my time, we used to have 3 times a week physical education in the schools, and now it's 1 or 2 in the public schools. And the private ones, something different, and they have better facilities. But in the public ones, they don't give the value anymore. But and then when we see now with the pandemic that we have, the sedentarism that affects so many people, and the only one, to be a little bit better if you are fit, if you have some physical fitness, and how important it is. I mean, the world should see this. And I agree with Yuri that should do something. But at the same time, we need to go fast. Because we are going to have other pandemics, other problems, and we need to move in some direction. We're not going to be dinosaurs. No, we have to do something. We have to do something else, to convince people, to convince the president or to the local people, and then if you should do it. And thank you very much. And it was wonderful to hear. And then now we can have some comparison, to write something like Rosa said, but the message should go to the local, to everybody in life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beatrice.
Thank you, Beatrice. Dr. Kishore sir?
Thank you very much, Professor Anneliese. It was wonderful. I think, yes, given a realistic picture of what's happening in South Africa, and also I think this resembles many nations in the world. And the necessity is quite well established. You know, the topic itself, creating enabling environments. Creativity, necessity is the mother of creation. The necessity is already there, existing. Necessity in terms that is more now visible on account of the pandemic, and also other areas, health sector, social sector, all over the world. This necessity is felt. So, but even then, enabling environments to be created, that is what Dr. Yuri has mentioned, that we need to market the product. And the product marketing will depend upon how you showcase and how appealing your product is so that it can be sold. But the necessity factor is well there, and Madam has mentioned about idealism and realism. The idealistic thoughts are rather more realistic now. This is two philosophies Madam has combined, I think, at least philosophy of idealism and realism. But the realism is something more, the interconnectivity, the sort of the ratio between both have become narrow. That is what we feel now when you see the glaring examples of the world, and what is required to be done is, of course, what I agree to Dr. Yuri 100%, that we need to aggressively market it. And this is something which nobody can say no, or nobody can say that anything which can be contradictory. So that is what I think Madam's presentation shown a realistic picture, and I think we need to dwell upon it more seriously as a second session of it, that to counter strategies that can be a separate forum analysis can be done. But I think this need to be, and the revelations of 223, it is going away from the curriculum is something very alarming. And I think that we need to be taken with a lot of all international associations and national associations should take up it with the desired seriousness. It is something which is going to affect the mankind. This has already been visible in many parts, and we need to take a very serious view on that, and how to do it, and the strategy to be evolved, that has to be discussed separately, I think. But this was a very excellent presentation. I appreciate, and Professor Andy's session, that you have brought to the realistic the picture of what is prevailing, especially in South Africa, is something which is eye-opening, and we need to delve into it more seriously. Thank you so much for the excellent presentation, and we should take it up further. That's what my humble submission is. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. If I can, Usha, can I comment quickly, please?
Usha, you are mute.
Right. I think Sarah is in.
No, Anneliese.
Usha, can I just I just comment one comment, please? Maybe we should look at physical education from a business perspective, and as was said, that the necessity for the product is there. We're just supplying it in the wrong way. So maybe we have to look at it from a business perspective.
Yeah. Professor Anneliese, it was such a wonderful session because you brought the truth out of the reality. And so far, it was as a sleeping giant. We were sleeping like a tsunami. And one fine day, the tsunami has come in. And I think it was a shock. It was a jerk. I understand, darling, we had the hurricane there, but I'm talking of the tsunami that we had. But it was a wonderful session, and especially with the hope and happening that you put across. And it was a wonderful video. I was thinking, how is that these African, they were jumping like the spontaneity of the vertical jump. It was looking so good. And I think the explosive power, it was immense in them. So the natural abilities through the traditional mode, it was too good. I think we would have seen some more videos onto it. And there was a game, something like Coco I saw. Do you have the game there? Named
Yes,
Coco?
we do.
Okay, we thought it's only in India. We never knew that in Africa you have this particular game because we thought it's an Indian origin. And I should also tell you, we had Professor Ken Hardman. He could not make it, but he did contribute to us almost a 25-page document. How was it possible to promote physical education? And he also gave it some tips for the workshop. So I need to thank his contribution too. And definitely in terms of sports leadership, I think Kishore sir is here. We would like to associate, as Darren rightly pointed out, we are trying to grab opportunities. And if your certification, if with collaboration in terms of the sport leadership could be done, we look forward to that too, because that's one of the purpose of such a webinar. And the part was, I think Yuri was telling with a hammer. 2023, I think you're going to wait. It's something which is shocking, which is said, and a whole PE teacher community. But as Beatrice said, we're not going to give up. And I'm sure you said to market it. I think it's high time others should know what our value is. So, ma'am, on behalf of the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, Government of India, Khelo India, thank you. Hats off to you. Every time I said it was a wonderful presentation because you brought in Africa. We traveled across. We were there with you. You took us across the journey. Thank you so much for giving us such a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'd like to thank Dr. Yuri, because you're the president. You get the second chance. You tell me ladies first. It's not ladies. Anyway, you're given here. So thank you so much. And I think we need to have a hammer. But before that, I think it's we have all the leaders here who's going to take an oath today that are going to take up all this and bring it up. And our voice, 2,000 voice is heard. And we have put across a message to you. And you will see that our message reaches to all the top bodies. So thank you so much, because I know you have the drive, you have the strength, and you have a hammer, but we'll give you the entire support so it becomes heavier. Thank you so much, Dr. Yuri. I'd like to thank Professor Rosa, who's, I think, come up with so much. I mean, you are so lucky to have such dynamic leaders who was able to find out from where all the gaps are, trying to bring in and to close the gaps. Thank you so much, Professor Rosa, because I'm sure you're going to take it up. And you would not leave Yuri for this. Definitely will be after this, so that we see that P is taken up at a greater height. Thank you so much, Professor Rosa, to bring in an international platform where we could get Professor Anneliese to join for us. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Professor Darlene, because I was just waiting. I thought hurricane has come in, and we pray to God. Our prayers will always be there, so you'll be definitely safe. And I don't think anything is going to happen to you. It'll just pass by. So we just wish, and we're so thankful to you that you joined in spite of all the problems that you had. So for the information of Kishore sir, I know the sir's hearing. I think I need to thank you for being with us, because one fine day when you're not with us, we feel there's something lacking. There's less light. It's not very powerful. So that's what. Thank you so much, Professor Darling. And Beatrice, it's been wonderful, because we look forward to a session tomorrow from you. And thank you so much for your valuable contribution and your presence. I'd like to thank Sarah, was there with us. Sarah just left. I'm so happy there are people together joining, and Sarah is willing to contribute. She sent a message saying that she definitely would like to take in. So it's so nice that you provide us a platform where our voices could be reached, our P voices could be reached out. So thank you so much, Beatrice. And I'd like to thank Dr. G. Kishore. So as I said, he's just waiting for opportunities. And Kishore sir, do you know what's happened with Darlene? It's the hurricane has happened to pass by. It's very bad. In spite of that, there's no connectivity. And in spite of that, Darlene has made a presence here. So I think, it's our responsibility to bring all of them to India, at least by the time the COVID settles, and at least 2021 end or 2022 beginning. So we wish that. Thank you so much. And thank you, Kishore sir, for supporting. Thank you, Dr. Sanjay. for being the
Thank you
host.
very much. Thank you, madam. Thank you, everybody.
I'd like to thank all our PE teachers. I think you saw it was a good, we had around 2,500 PE teachers who were listening to the talk, and whatever message you put across is being carried, but I'm sure there'll be a hope. So the hope dominates. And with this, we look to the future for a better PE and for a better world. So once again, on behalf of the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, Government of India, thank you to each one and namaste. Not namaste alone, it's a high five, because Sarah has taught us to energize by the time they leave. High five. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nisha.
Namaste.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kishore.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Dr.
Usha.
Yuri. Thank you,
Dr.
Bye-bye.
Jay.
Bye.
everyone.
Sanjay, thank you.
Anneliese, we have a feedback, and you can find the